Brent Buchanan's here. He's here for two reasons. One is he has not spilled a drop of hot chocolate on that clean white shirt, which is very impressive. And two, he's got data. Brent, tell folks who you are, where you and what your data is, and then just start spewing it out. And thank you for making time to join us.
Yeah, good to be with everyone this morning. So Brent Buchanan, I founded a firm called Cygnal. We're a private Republican polling firm, though you may have seen some of our numbers out there. And when people think of polling, usually there's negative associations with that. And I just want to separate ourselves from those pollsters because those pollsters have zero profit motive. And if we were constantly wrong like they were, we would never get hired again. And so, for those of you who are not involved in kind of the campaign industry or haven't seen under the hood, there are dozens of us on both sides of the aisle that work with campaigns and help them understand what's going on, how do we get here, where do we want to go, how do we get there, what messages are going to work, who we're going to target, how is progress going against those. That's really what pollsters do. And when you see pollsters that just put out public numbers for a 10-question poll every couple of weeks, those are not really pollsters. And so they give us a bad name. We actually start every invitation to our poll as this is not for a media organization, so that we can actually build trust with the person taking our survey. And so we go in the field every month to put out some public information, just to give us something to talk about and to help share another side of multiple issues that really against what public pollsters are doing. And so our poll that came out actually is going to be released today, hasn't even been sent out. You guys are some of the first to hear it, is the fact that Donald Trump has really pulled up down ballot Republicans even further than he did in the 24 election. And what I mean by that is the number of people and the type of people who are going to vote in the 26 election, and yes, I'm already turning us to the 26 election, is a different universe of individuals than those who vote in presidential elections. And because of something called the diploma divide, which is if you are college educated, you're now essentially a Democrat. And if you're not, you're now essentially Republican. And 30 years ago, that was the inverse. That would actually harm Republicans going into new midterms. And so this interesting data right on the heels of Donald Trump's and a Republican trifecta victory actually shows that Republicans down ballot, mainly congressional Republicans, are actually doing 2 points better than they ended up at the end of the 24 election. And I just find this fascinating because I think it flies in the face of this. Republicans are going to lose special elections. They're going to do poor in the midterms because they're now the party of the working class. And Donald Trump is just a really unique individual that is beginning to transform the Republican Party, because I think up until this point, it has only been about Trump for a lot of these voters. And it's beginning to transfer to other Republicans and not just Donald Trump now that this is his last term. And another interesting point is as we look at kind of turning back to the 24 election, and these questions were Sean's idea, so I cannot take credit for this. And it was asking voters who they thought of a list of Republican influencers really impacted the election for Donald Trump, and then vice versa, who do they think Democrats influencers affected the election. What was really interesting about this, I think, just on the broad brushstrokes, are the fact that 55% of voters thought that no Democrat influencers made any impact for Kamala Harris and the Democrats. And we had people named like Taylor Swift, and we had Oprah and Beyonce and LeBron James, and like all these people who were coming out in culture and saying that we're for Kamala Harris. And then you had 55% say, I don't really think any of those folks generated support for Kamala Harris. And one way to really read into that is the fact that voters don't really like being told what to do, especially when it sounds like you're dumb, I have to tell you what to do. And that kind of, in my mind, was the whole Democratic campaign, is like, if you knew enough, like if you were as smart as us, you would be with Kamala Harris. But obviously, you're not smart enough. And so we've got to fix that for you. And we're going to put these people that are well respected in entertainment, and they're going to tell you how to fix all of this. And you can be smart enough to vote for Kamala Harris. And then you flip over to the Republican side, and you have 47% say Elon Musk was the number one factor in driving support for Trump during the presidential election, followed by Joe Rogan and RFK Jr., both tied at 22%. And if you would have said, even 2 years ago, that those would be the three names that drove the election for Donald Trump, you would think you were on something, because those three people weren't Republicans. They weren't talking about Republicans. They weren't thinking, if anything, they were against Republicans 2 years ago. And so when you then combine that with what actually drove the election, we did an exit poll, 9,000 interviews on election day, and of people who had actually voted. And one of the most interesting things is that white voters as a whole just didn't move. College educated white voters moved further left, non-college moved a little bit further right, but it basically kind of kept white voters leveled out. If anything, you could almost say that white voters moved a hair towards Kamala Harris. And it was the non-white vote that drove all the movement for Donald Trump in 24 compared to 2020. Well, why is that the case? Look at who these influencers are. These people are influencers online. Joe Rogan on podcasts. RFK Jr., really an online sensation because the mainstream media didn't give him any oxygen. Elon Musk, I mean, he's kind of across the board, but then when you compare that to how people consume their news and how they're voting, all these online platforms, and not just X, but streaming apps. So if you get your news from streaming apps and places like this, you voted for Donald Trump by 26 points. If you get your news from YouTube, you voted for Donald Trump by 14 points. TikTok, Kamala Harris only won TikTok news consumers by 14 points. And so you start to see how this entire ecosystem of media.
Sorry, Brett, sorry to interrupt, but is that people saying that's their top source?
So
Or
when we ask that question, we ask them to pick up to three. So that way they don't have to box themselves in and say.
It's one of their three top choices.
Correct.
So someone who listed TikTok is one of their three top choices. Kamala Harris only won them by
14.
14. Amazing. Okay, sorry,
And
keep going.
yeah, and it's an audience that if you looked at how they voted in 2020, because we always ask folks, how'd you vote in the prior election too? Those same voters were for Harris by like 30 or for Biden by 35 points. So it's not just simply people choosing to say, okay, I used to be on mainstream media and now I'm going to go get my news through alternative sources. It's actually preferential changes because of those news sources and culture on these folks. And it presents itself in this influencer question. And so all those Democrat influencers that people said mostly didn't make an impact were essentially all on mainstream media. And most of the Republican-leaning influencers were online. And I think this really breaks out a new way that elections are going to be defined. And it's not going to be who spent the most on ABC, on the broadcast channel and on the local news that's going to define elections moving forward.